You know, every single time you click on something in an app, you're actually telling a story. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on how a company like VIETDAK listens to literally millions of those stories to shape their entire business strategy.
So, how does an app really get inside its users' heads? I mean, especially a complex one that's dealing with everything from farm supply chains to big export dashboards. How does it figure out what you want, what you need, and maybe, most importantly, what you're going to do next? It's probably the fundamental question for any app out there right now.
Well, the answer is pretty incredible. They don't just, collect a bunch of data. They build what their team calls a digital nervous system. Just think about that for a second. A living, sensing network that literally feels every single tap, every swipe in real time. So let's dive in and see how they build this thing, starting from the very beginning.
Okay, so like any massive, complex system, it all starts with the simplest building blocks you can imagine. And for product analytics, that absolute foundation, it all starts with a single click.
Right, so this is what they call a product event, and you can think of it as the absolute atom of this whole ecosystem. It's the raw material, but it's so much more than just a click. It's which button you clicked, the exact time you clicked it, and all the little details that go with it, like the price of the item you were looking at. This is the ground truth of what a user is actually doing.
Now, obviously, one single event on its own doesn't tell you a whole lot, but when you start stringing them together, that's when a story emerges. When you group all the events from one continuous visit, you get what's called a session. And that session is basically the story of that one visit. Where they come from, what do they look at, where did they go next?
And then, the final piece of this foundation, you take all of those sessions, the one from today, from last week, even from last year, and you tie them all back to the most important unit in the whole system, the user. This is the absolute center of the universe here. Everything revolves around the user. Because by connecting all that behavior to one unique person, VIETDAK can build this incredibly rich historical profile of their habits, their preferences, and ultimately, their value.
So you see the hierarchy here, right? It's simple, but it's super powerful. It all starts with that tiny little event. A bunch of events create a session which tells a story. And all those sessions come together to build a complete picture of the user. That's the bedrock, the absolute foundation of their entire analytics pyramid. Okay, so now let's move up to the next layer and see how all this raw data turns into real strategy.
All right, so we've got this solid foundation of raw data. But now comes the real challenge. How do you make it all speak? How do you take millions and millions of these little events and boil them down to just a handful of numbers that can actually help you make smart business decisions?
And this really shows you that crucial transformation. On the one hand, you've got this massive ocean of raw data. It's noisy, it's unstructured, it's really hard to make sense of. What the system does is funnel all that chaos into just a few strategic KPIs, key performance indicators. And these are the opposite of chaos. They're actionable, they're clear, and they're tied directly to what the business is trying to achieve.
So VIETDAK is smart about this. They organize their KPIs into these really clear categories. For growth, they're looking at things like daily and monthly active users, basically how big and healthy is our audience. For retention, they're asking, hey, are people coming back? So they track who's still around after 7 days or 30 days. For engagement, it's all about feature adoption. Are people actually using the cool new stuff we built? And this one's so important. For stability, they're watching that crash rate like a hawk. Because let's be honest, a buggy app is the fastest way to lose users.
And this is a perfect example of why a good KPI is so powerful. What you're looking at is a classic purchase funnel. So let's say 100% of people view a product. Okay, great. But then, look at this. Only 45% actually added to their cart. Whoa, that's a massive drop-off right there. And then, it gets even worse. Only 15% of the original group go on to complete the purchase. See? This KPI isn't just a boring number. It's basically a giant flashy red light screaming, hey, something is broken right here, in that step between the cart and the checkout.
Okay, so we've journeyed from raw, messy data all the way up to clear, actionable metrics. But now we're at the very top of the pyramid. And this is where things get really futuristic. This is the point where the system stops just telling you what happened yesterday and starts telling you what's going to happen tomorrow, all thanks to AI.
A perfect example of this is something called churn prediction. So the AI is constantly analyzing user behavior, asking questions like, is this person using the app less often? Are their interactions getting shorter?
And based on that, it can actually identify users who are at a high risk of leaving the platform. But here's the magic part. It doesn't just send up a flare. It automatically kicks off a retention campaign to try and win them back. And that is so important because, as we all know, it's way cheaper to keep a customer you have than to go out and find a new one.
So, what are the clues the AI is looking for? Well, it's not just one big thing. The number one red flag is definitely a drop in how often someone interacts with the app. But it's also looking at other signals, like if they're totally ignoring new features or if their sessions are getting shorter and shorter. The AI is smart enough to combine all these little, subtle shifts in behavior to make a really accurate prediction.
And the AI's job doesn't end with predicting churn. Not at all. It's also working behind the scenes to personalize feature recommendations just for you. It's on the lookout for anomalies, like a sudden spike in errors or even fraudulent activity. And check this out, it even forecasts server demand. For a business like VIETDAK, that's a game changer. It means they know exactly how to gear up for their absolute busiest time of year, the peak agricultural season, so their systems don't crash and they don't lose out on business.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, you've got the foundational data, you've got the strategic metrics, and you've got this layer of predictive AI on top. What you end up with is something way bigger than just a bunch of charts on a dashboard.
In fact, there's a quote from the source material that just nails it. They say it's more than a tool, it's the central nervous system of the entire digital ecosystem, a bridge between data, AI, and business strategy. I mean, that says it all, right? This thing isn't just a tool to measure stuff. It's the living, breathing nervous system of their whole operation, feeling every user action and then translating it into a smart, strategic response. It's the ultimate bridge connecting raw data to the company's biggest goals.
And that really leaves us with one big question to think about. VIETDAK has built this incredible system to listen, to understand, and even to predict what's next. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? In a world where every single click tells a part of a story, how well is your business listening?